Colorado this week, Bob Dole warned that if Pat Buchanan is the Republican nominee, the party might lose both the presidency and control of Congress. In response, Buchanan warned that if anyone other than himself becomes president, blacks will retain the right to vote. 6 of one, half dozen of another. According to a Senate Committee on Violence, Denise Brown has done more to bring attention to the cause of battered women than any other person. Well, almost any other person. Once again, OJ gets the short shrift. Well, Washington, D.C. Mayor Marion Barry says he has devised a money-saving plan that would close the district's Lorton prison and transfer its 7,000 inmates to private lockups. One hitch is that the financially strapped district doesn't have the startup money to implement the plan. Another hitch is that the guy who devised the plan smokes crack. So, 2 hitches. 130 years after the Civil War, the state of Mississippi has finally voted to abolish slavery. Representatives say they would have liked to have done it sooner, but they were delayed due to some awfully big cotton crops. They had some kind of big cotton thing. All right.
Welcome, everyone, to Read Out here on this Sunday evening. I've got Christian and John with me here. John, how you doing?
Good. Little sunburnt, little tired, but
yeah,
you're ready to have a good time.
Excellent. You just got back like a couple hours ago, right?
Yeah, I finished the 5-hour drive just a few hours ago. Brought the whole setup back into the house, and we're ready to go.
Excellent. You got anything to drink to keep you powered through the night?
I actually have some water.
Okay.
Which is like 4 days old at this point.
Nice.
So
water doesn't.
It might be mixed with like Gatorade or some other sort of hydration drink. So we'll see how it is at this point in time.
All right, Christian, how you doing tonight?
Good evening. Doing well. I'm glad you made it home safe and sound, John, and congratulations on the good performance. But yeah, doing well.
Thank
you. Doing well.
Excellent.
There's an
All right,
echo.
Christian, you got a beer or anything?
No, that was me. I fixed it.
Oh, okay. Just water, dude. Same thing.
Just water. All right.
Yeah,
wow.
boring tonight.
Guess I'm the only one drinking anything stiff. I've got some Benchmark bourbon here, and I'm also doing all right. Pretty chill Sunday for me. All righty. Although we just got back from the grocery store, so I haven't actually had a chance to eat dinner. So I may be munching away at a sandwich my wife just prepared for me. So
Base.
Yeah.
She made you
Nice
a
to
sandwich.
Your wife made you a sandwich?
Yeah.
it's living the dream over here. Yeah. Okay. So tonight we have what I think will be a very interesting presentation for you guys. So Tim Keller, just to set the stage, Tim Keller died a few years ago. And a lot of people have a lot of respect for Tim Keller and have learned a lot of things. I had to kind of, after his passing, relearn to not just trash him when someone would say the name Tim Keller, because in the years prior to his death, I had become very frustrated with his teachings, both looking back in time as well as his teachings, sort of his more recent teachings up to the election and various, especially around things like race and what we're going to talk about today, corporate guilt. So for anyone who doesn't know about Tim Keller, he is was a Presbyterian, I think PCA minister in New York, and had a real heart for that city and his ministry there. And he's written a very famous book on marriage that a lot of people like, and it's just generally been an active person in the kind of reformed, very centrist Presbyterian and just larger Protestant circles. So when I first started to realize that there were some problematic issues with his teachings was when he came out with this, when I first watched this video, which I think came out maybe in 2016 at first, but then sort of recirculated in 2018 when I saw it, and then really recirculated in 2020 after George Floyd and all of the race riots and race discussions happening around then, with people, white people asking for forgiveness for the sins of their grandfathers who owned slaves or didn't own slaves, but just for their whiteness in general. So things like that. But fortunately, I had already taken the time to watch this video and kind of wrestle with some of the issues that it raised a couple years prior to George Floyd. And so when I was hearing all these things that, looking back, I think a lot of people are pretty ashamed about, I didn't get caught up in all of the race discussions, the craziness of it, because I had already, I think, dealt with it in a less high stress scenario than a lot of people who just felt basically emotionally blackmailed into going along with these rituals, forgiveness rituals and things that sounded very Christian at the time. So that kind of sets the stage. Hopefully everyone is familiar with the key points of context. I think we all lived through 2020, so everyone knows how insane that
Summer of
particular
love,
summer
baby.
was. Yes. So I think that's enough for me. Have either of you guys heard of Tim Keller before tonight?
No.
No, sir.
All right, there you go. So, yeah, I'm going to trash on him a little bit, but I do want to set the stage with the fact that he seemed like a nice guy. Even people that really disagree with him on these particular issues were very critical of him during his life. When they did meet him, had very cordial conversations, and not someone that I want to just trash on. But,
I think
right.
John's going to have a lot of trash to talk on this guy.
Well, so I have not watched this video yet, so I'm actually completely unaware. I think you had mentioned this video a while ago, but yeah, I haven't seen it, so this should be fun. I'm hoping it's entertaining.
Yeah.
Oh, it is. It is.
And I mean, it's going to be a good discussion for us, I think, as well. So if either of you gentlemen want me to stop at any point in time, just let me know, and I will hit the pause button, and we can discuss.
Sounds good.
Here is Reverend Tim.
Yeah. Let me know if this is quiet for you.
Our next speaker is Reverend
It's
Tim
a
Keller,
little
who will be
quiet.
speaking on
it is a
racism
little
and
quiet for me.
corporate evil, a white guy's perspective.
Did that fix it a little bit?
Sounds the same. There we go.
Yeah, that's obviously it's a somewhat comical title, but what I want to do is I want to build on what John has just said, which John gives the theological bedrock for why racism.
Can you kick it
is
up a little bit more?
antithetical to-
I'm maxed out here. I think I have here. Give me a second. I think I have an extension somewhere that allows me to get it to 150%.
Christian theology and a Christian understanding of the gospel. But I want to talk to you about the concept of corporate evil or systemic evil and injustice. How, and I'll explain this in a second, but I start off by saying Western people in general, and white Americans in particular, have little or no concept of corporate evil, or they are actively set against the idea. I think it's very important for me as a white man to say, look, that's wrong, especially to say to other white Americans, many of you are, that's wrong. And if we don't get what the Bible says about corporate evil, we will not only understand the Bible itself, but we won't understand what so many of our non-white brothers and sisters and friends and neighbors are saying. We just won't get it. We'll think they're all paranoid. Okay, so I'd like to talk to you first about the idea of corporate responsibility, corporate moral responsibility, corporate guilt. Secondly, systemic evil, and then thirdly, how the gospel addresses those things. First of all, corporate responsibility.
Okay, so corporate responsibility. Now that I actually that on its own makes a lot of sense to me. Like, I think that we as a Christian community have a lot of responsibility to do things right and to fix things and to live moral lives and to help those in need, all those sort of things. Those are like oughts, right, in the Christian life.
Yep.
Well, not only fix things, but also oppose things as well, I would say. Yeah.
I think the question that we'll see over and over is, are those responsibilities one of, collective individualism, where you've got a bunch of individuals who collectively have that in the context of their community, but it still is just, it's, the total is just the sum of all the parts, or is there some kind of third responsibility that the corporation has, or the group has, beyond what the individuals have. And the same goes for the question of guilt. Because in terms of responsibility, you might actually be able to make a case that a group does have a special responsibility. And even in terms of legality in the U.S., we give corporations this status of legal personhood. And, you know, an interesting point that someone once made is that if you're going to give corporations legal personhood for the purposes of, you know, getting around certain tax things and whatnot, it also seems like, well, maybe with that personhood should come a certain amount of duty to do good, right? Just like we would expect of a person to be a contributor to society. Maybe it's not all profit. Now, maybe profit is enough. Maybe that is how a corporation does good for society. But you know, there's a case to be made that maybe there's something more. But in terms of guilt and spiritual guilt and responsibility, that's kind of the big question. And can you really put those two things on the same side, you know, as two sides of the same coin, or is there something else at play?
Right, because he's trying to make the jump from responsibility to guilt, and then not like Christian responsibility and Christian guilt, but some sort of vague ethnic term. Because I'm also confused about this. When they say like white guilt, like what do you mean by that?
Right.
Because like, what does an Irish person who's never owned slaves like what are they just generically white? Like a Norwegian is generically white? Like what do you mean by that?
Right.
So I mean, what monolith are you even referring to? Do you just mean American whites owning slaves? Like, because even then, it's like, what if some immigrant came over in 1891? Like, what are we talking about here?
Well, let's let him make the case. But yeah.
Responsibility. Let me just show you how big parts of the Bible, I'll give you three, Joshua 7, Daniel 9, and Romans 5, excuse me, make no sense if you think of moral responsibility in strictly individualistic terms. If you're reading through the Bible and you get to Joshua 7, especially if you're a white American, especially if you're a Western person, you go, what? In Joshua 7, I won't go into all the details of the background, a man named Achan, an Israelite, they're coming into the promised land. They are strictly told, we're not here for plunder. Achan takes some plunder, a robe, some wealth, takes it for himself, hides it under his tent. He breaks the law, goes against God's will, goes against the law for the Israelites. And when it's discovered, he's not just punished, but his entire family is stoned to death with him. And Western people, especially white Americans, go, wait a minute. He did it. They didn't do it. Now, let me just get right off and say this. Most people in most other cultures, most other centuries understand why that happened. If you're a New Yorker and you have some objection to some part of the Bible that you find offensive, I want you to realize it's your cultural location that's causing the offense. Don't you dare think that just because you find that part of the Bible offensive, everybody in the whole world would think the Bible's offensive. That's culturally narrow of you to think that. Because most people, most places know that we are not just the product of our choices, individual choices. That if you can do something bad, the fact that you can do it, what helped you become the kind of person that can do it, was to a great degree your family. Your family produced you directly, or at least failed to keep you from becoming that. And therefore, at least actively or passively, your family participates in your guilt. Most people, most places, Americans, especially white Americans, don't understand.
So, okay, I just have a question. Okay, if we're following this familial guilt, although I believe he's even not really giving the full context of that, because the reason why his whole family would be stoned is because they all knew. Right? It wasn't like him alone in his tent. It was probably him and his wife and his children in that tent, or whatever the situation might have been. So they might have actually known about the treasure that their dad stole for them, ostensibly, right? So that they would be rich. They would have what they wanted, right? So they were all guilty because they did not come forward and say, this is not what we were supposed to do, right? But just going on his thing about families and some tying in of guilt there, does that mean that there's bad bloodlines? There's evil bloodlines?
So two things, right? I think that the argument that they were killed because they were complicit is certainly possible, but I think I think that is a little bit cope from people that want to argue against a notion of corporate guilt. And so
I'm not even arguing against corporate guilt, but I think that's just an element of context that's left out.
Perhaps, but I certainly don't think that's necessary. And I think that to assume that all of the people that were killed necessarily knew of the sin that was being committed is probably asking too much of the story. I think that there's a good likelihood that some of the people, at least some of the people that died, I mean, especially if there were little children involved who had absolutely no, ability to make any changes to the situation, that still doesn't make God unjust, and it still doesn't, it would allow for a certain amount of corporate punishment. But the other thing is this equation of punishment and guilt that I think is the central issue with this whole video. So I'll just lay out my thesis right now. I think that you have to separate guilt from punishment, and in the same way that you have to separate mercy on the same side as a punishment, and forgiveness. So right, forgiveness and guilt are like eternal states. So those speak to the spiritual and the eternal, whereas mercy and punishment are temporal. Those happen here. And so very often God will punish the children or the people within a nation for the sins of other people that are within that nation, whether those are the representatives or if you're in a family, the sin of one person in the family may absolutely cause punishment to the entire family. But that's a very different thing from saying that they are guilty in a Christian sense, right? And so, I mean, you'll see this all the time. When it comes to the reason why when we engage in war with other countries, a certain amount of a civilian life is in fact justified. In part, people will justify it on the grounds of the fact that it's unavoidable. Some civilian casualties are unavoidable, but in my view, I think that the people of a nation do have to bear the consequences of the actions of the leaders of that nation, and that is in fact just. And so when it comes to that temporal space, which is where earthly judgments happen, you will see that occur, and I think that is still just, and it certainly is just when God does it. And I think that's what you see being demonstrated here. And so you have the mercy. So you'll see that as well, where people will get mercy for the goodness of someone else. So like with Lot in Sodom and Gomorrah, right? God was willing to spare the entire city if he could just find, I think, 10 good people, and he couldn't find 10 good people. But if he had found 10 good people to spare that he'd give mercy to the entire city. But that certainly wasn't giving individual forgiveness or like spiritual forgiveness to the entire city. And so we have to keep that separation in mind, right? The spiritual from the temporal, the spiritual having the forgiveness and the guilt, and the temporal having the mercy and the punishment. I think if you keep that in mind, it actually makes things pretty simple. As you look at all the different examples that he'll bring up, what you'll see with his analysis is he is conflating the two. He'll see someone asking for mercy and read that as forgiveness and say, oh, see, you see someone admitting this idea of corporate forgiveness. And it's like, well, no, the forgiveness is still individual. As Christians, we basically have to believe that. We don't think that God, doles out individual salvific forgiveness or guilt on the basis of what someone else does. We do believe in individual guilt and forgiveness, but that person is asking for mercy, for the nation or for the group of people. And so if you start to separate those out and you don't conflate them, then I think it actually clears up a lot of the confusion. But what you'll see in this video is he's doing a lot of conflating the two.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I kind of get what you're saying there. So like, let's take just a nation, for instance. A nation can have punitive measures against them for a variety of sins or whatever it might be. But that's separate from saying every individual person in that nation is guilty of it. So you're saying there's a punishment aspect to it, which is the temporal, but not all of them are actually like eternally guilty of that thing, right? Exactly. So, well, let's say, for instance, hypothetically, we sent like 1 million soldiers to die in to take over some other country in the world that was totally unjustified, and then some bad thing happens to us here. Not every individual person who lives here is guilty of that thing, but we still bear the punishment of it, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I kind of get what you're saying.
understand that. Most people, most places recognize that because you're not the product of your own individual choices. You are the product of a community, and you produce, listen, not only are you the product of a community to a great degree, but that you, by even participating in that community, are producing other kinds of people with their particular kinds of character too, because of your interaction with them. So, Josh?
So this is another thing that I think also I just want to get out before he gets to it, because I imagine he will get to it. But if we are going to do the corporate guilt, like a racial guilt, does that apply to every race that has done bad things, or only to the Western peoples?
Only to white people.
That's what it seems like. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the thing, because that just seems like it's just not applied evenly at all
No,
whatsoever. It seems almost like an extension of self-guilt. Like when he refers to white people or Western people, like it almost like creeps me out a little bit, because he's like saying it like white people, right? Am I right? Like they don't get it, or like they're somehow like blind or evil or not cultured or something like that. Like that to me, it just seems strange, right? It'd be the same thing if, like, I don't know, like if I tried to say that about any other racial group, okay, there would be problems. Okay, YouTube would not like the stream anymore. But yeah.
Yeah, it is frustrating. And Reformed Renegade is correct that Tim Keller is one of the reasons why some of the liberal trends in the PCA are still there. Maybe he's just a reflection of it. I don't know if he's really the cause. But Reformed Renegade, remind me, are you PCA or are you Presbyterian? I forget your affiliations. But
I think he's
yeah,
Presbyterian.
Yeah, it is frustrating. And CRT, it's not as big now, but it certainly was big back in 2020. Everyone was talking about it unironically as if it was a good thing. And I'm sitting here like, what is everyone thinking? This is insane. I mean, I read White Fragility. I didn't read the entire thing. I read a summary, and then I read a few chapters just to make sure the summary was accurate. And it was, I mean, there was that period of time where everyone was short on toilet paper. I seriously considered using the pages from White Fragility as toilet paper. It was that bad. It was. So anyways, CRT is it's real. People believe in it. It's dangerous, and it is just as awful as you know your conservative uncle makes it out to be. It's that bad.
Well, I think people really ate this up during that time, right? Because it was, I guess, liberal, middle class people didn't have enough things to worry about. So this is like something they could virtue signal about. Like, I guess that's what it seems like.
Yeah, for sure. It's a way to virtue signal.
Says that there is corporate responsibility inside a family. Okay, let's take it up a little higher. In Daniel chapter 9, now we're talking about corporate guilt and responsibility inside a whole race or a culture. Because Daniel, in Daniel 9, confesses sins, repents for sins, says it's his responsibility to repent for sins that his ancestors did that he didn't do at all. They didn't do it all. Especially, I mean, I still hear it, though, especially years ago. I'm an older man when I lived in the South in the 1970s. Over and over, I'll get back to this, I heard white people say, yeah, it's a shame what slavery did, but I never owned any slaves, so why in the world does anybody think that I, as a white person, now have any responsibility to that community over there at all? I didn't own slaves. But here is Daniel feeling a responsibility.
Can you pull up
for
Daniel 9?
Repenting.
Yeah, let me see what he's actually referring to here.
Yeah, Daniel 9 is an interesting passage, and it is. There's one in Ezra that's very similar as well. And you'll see these corporate prayers where someone is basically admitting the guilt of the nation in the past, of their forefathers, and lamenting it, and certainly asking for mercy, maybe even asking forgiveness. The case he's making, I think, is a stretch, but Daniel 9 is one of the hardest ones to get around. But I think you also have to take it in context of it's bemoaning the sins of your fathers is different from accepting the personal guilt of those sins, right? Well, and that's just a very different thing. And I think that you can absolutely read Daniel 9, and really should read Daniel 9 in that first context of he's sorrowful for the sins, and those sins have impacted the way Israel, the very situation that Israel's in, right? In Daniel is in Babylon because of those sins, and so he's very sad about them, and he may even use the term forgiveness, but never explicitly in a way that makes it seem like he's asking forgiveness for someone else's sins, and certainly not in a way that can't be understood in the context of he's just expressing his sorrow for the situation that they're in and what caused it.
Well, I mean, this is Like I pray for our own nation in the same way for the terrible things that we've done, and like wanting to return to Christ and stuff like that. So I don't understand how this would apply to. I mean, like you said, I think it is a stretch to
So the
try and
close, yeah.
good.
There's one thing. So like with abortion and stuff, that's a sin that this nation clearly has, and people will talk about asking forgiveness for abortion, and they mean it in a personal sense. And I think there's actually some validity there in asking personal forgiveness for the sins of abortion, not because the sin of someone else who aborted their baby falls on you, but because when you live in an evil system, the evil spreads, and you are tainted by that evil, and the sins can be sins of omission, sins can be sins of commission, and so surely we are not doing enough to combat this evil. Surely we are tainted by that. We don't think about it the right way. Like there are personal sins that we have as a result of this sin that we just live amongst, right? So when you live in a system,
Right, like complacency to it, like that sort of thing.
complacency, just there, and it could be other sins, but they are still specific individual sins in my mind, and you might not know exactly how to express that, and so you just sort of ask a general forgiveness, still at an individual level, but just sort of a general forgiveness for the sins that are associated with this miasma of abortion, or sub in whatever kind of corporate sin we're talking about. So I still think that's different from the type of corporate evil that he's talking about. It comes close, but you can still, the forgiveness side of it is still, I believe, doled out individually by God. I don't think that he is, assigning Chris, you the sin of someone else's, some random person in the United States, on the other side of the United States, abortion that you have no knowledge of, right? That just doesn't make sense. So yeah, it is tricky because it sounds very pious, and it sounds very like when you can find other extra excuses to ask forgiveness. It makes you sound more holy, but you have to be careful about where it would logically take you.
Right. I mean, because if you take that to its logical extent, like, do you ask for forgiveness for like individual murders that are committed in your country?
Right.
Right. I mean, like gang violence. Do I pray for forgiveness for gang violence that happens in inner cities? Right. I mean, I think that is a kind of expression of the decadence and kind of internal decay of our society, right? Which we can definitely pray for the heart of the nation.
Right.
But
Which you may even participate in some way.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, exactly. Right. But that's still our own individual sin, not some sort of like, I don't know,
Yeah. The two
and again,
big
it only
exceptions-
gets applied one way, right? In his application, it's a very specific thing, and you can never bring up anything else ever. It's yeah.
The two big exceptions that come that might indicate that there is some amount of corporate guilt or forgiveness on God's part is substitutionary atonement and original sin. And it depends on your particular view of original sin, because there are multiple views. There's the view that we take on the actual sin of Adam, not just the sin nature. The other view would be that you take on the sin nature of Adam, and then you commit your own sins. And even within those views, there's other perspectives on how the guilt is assigned, right? Is it guilt for the sin nature, or is it guilt, because of your sin nature, you start to commit sins, and then that's what you're guilty for. So they're all your sins. You're not really guilty for Adam's sin, but you get this sin nature through Adam, and that's really what's being propagated. And then you commit your own sins, and now you're guilty. So different views on original sin. Depending on your particular view, you might not need any form of corporate evil to accept it, or federal evil, I guess, in that case. It's not really corporate. It's one man passing on his sin to all of the people underneath them. But either way you look at it, I do think that in my particular view, I do think that it could be an example of something like corporate evil, where someone else's sin is being applied to you, the actual sin, or at least the like I think of it as being.
Well, actually, I think it's again, I'm going to say to take the orthodox position here, but it's they tend to view it as the consequences of the actions get passed down, not the actual sin in itself. So in a way, like this actually makes sense in this application as well, where we suffer the consequences of the sin, but not the actual guilt of those, like the actual sin itself, right?
That's more my perspective as well. I tend to think that basically we're on the wrong side. We are born on as citizens of the wrong team. Like we're born in the enemy's camp, and because we're born in the enemy's camp, we're the enemy, right? So until God rescues us, we are on the wrong side and deserving of whatever comes to all people on that side. That's a little bit different from saying that we inherit the actual sin that Adam committed. And it's also different from saying that we just inherit the sin nature and then have to go and commit our own sins. So, I think that's a good way to think of it, inheriting the consequences of the sin.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, original sin is very original, right? It can't, that's not something that would apply to a conversation about white guilt, for instance, and the same with substitutionary atonement. We're talking about the first Adam and the second Adam. We can probably assume that what happens with these two characters is not going to be something that's representative across all of humanity.
Well, even if we take the consequences application here, when it comes to, I guess, this great evil that he's talking about, slavery, I agree 100% that we suffer the consequences of slavery, right, as a nation, right, as all the nations do, right? So we certainly suffer the consequences, but I don't know if that guilt is like transcendent, right?
For things his ancestors did. Why? Because he knows that the culture that he's part of produced the sins of the past, and he's still part of that culture. He senses the responsibility. The Bible senses the responsibility. He senses the connection. Now let me throw this over onto the positive. Not only will Daniel feel that that the sins of other members of the community I participate in, so I should experience some of the shame and responsibility for that. But the good things that happen by members of the community, I feel I can take some credit for. Now let's be honest now, guys, men and women. If you're white, didn't you have a little trouble understanding Linsanity? Just.
What is? I'm sorry, as a white person, what is Linsanity?
Did he say? Yeah, I have no idea. It's a show or something. I don't know.
You brought up an interesting point, though, saying that, like, looking at it the opposite side, if you brought something positive as well, that you could also take credit for that positivity as a culture. So let's say, America was founded by Europeans, us as Europe. I mean, just saying.
Yeah, if you really don't want to participate in Western European culture, then just don't use anything that was made by Westerns or Europeans.
Yeah. Well,
see how your life goes.
But that doesn't make any sense, though, because if you try and take it in sort of like a holistic sense, well, you have to take the credit with the blame. It's like, okay, but surely the credit outweighs the blame, and it's a net positive. So, like, is this some sort of weird, like, moral zero-sum game where we did a bad thing, but we did two good things, so now we're happy because we did overall net positive in the world? Because that's a weird thing. Like, that's when it comes to corporate guilt, like, if you're going to be ashamed of people for the bad things that they've done, like, surely you can be proud of the good things that your nation has done as well, right? Yes. And that is probably something he would not be comfortable with. Like, if I went up to him and said, dude, I am so proud that me did all these things, right? As a white person, I invented all of these things. He'd be like, well, no, that's not right. It's like, well, no, you're saying I get the guilt, but none of the credit? Well, this isn't fair. This is BS.
Yeah. If you believe in corporate guilt, you should also believe in corporate pride. So if you believe in white guilt, you should also believe in white pride.
White pride,
No problem with that. Yeah.
White pride, baby.
I'm not going to do it.
White pride, Tim Keller. That's right. Let's go. Now I'm on board. I get it now. I mean, somebody pointed out in the comments, but is like inner city black culture, are they bearing the consequences of their corporate guilt?
I was just thinking about that too.
In this?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And the fact that, like, when we talked about abortion, like, a black child has a 50% shot.
Yeah. What about all of women aborting children? Are they all responsible for that as well?
I am reliably informed that 100% of people who have abortions are women.
Yeah. Yep. This is
So
checks
is there gender guilt as well? So it's not just ethnic, and I don't even know what he means by ethnic. Does he mean like literally like people of light skin tone are guilt of Western people as a monolith? All Western people are guilty of this thing by virtue of their skin color when he says white, or is it like individual ethnic groups? Like, does he mean
addresses that with an
Americans?
example a little bit, and I forget exactly what he says. Chris, you watched it more recently. Doesn't he talk about that? Like he gives an example of an immigrant who just got here or something.
I don't recall.
Okay.
I don't recall.
It might be
Well, but if
wrong.
you're going to cut out exceptions, then do we cut out exceptions for everybody who's in the culture,
Right,
but not
right.
historically part of the culture?
Yep.
Yeah.
See, now I'm confused
And
again.
what about the black people that are descendants of slave
Yeah,
owners
no.
themselves? Yeah.
Well, and it's like, but do I get credit for the black people that are here doing well? Because without slavery, they wouldn't be here.
That's very true.
So do I get the credit for that or no? It's comical almost.
It is.
A
Yeah.
little. Come on. Come on. You can look me in the eye and say, okay. And the reason was because you were saying, if a white person makes the Knicks and does well, I don't get all think, wow, it's so proud to me. I'm proud to be white. You know. But that's because you are the majority here. And if you were in China and you were a white American in China, and you knew to some degree that there was, people often looked at you, white Americans, in this and that way, and some white American in China really makes good, and everybody's cheering this person, you would feel that that's reflecting good on you, wouldn't you? Because as a minority, you would sense the corporate.
See, this gets into like gay power dynamics. It's only if you don't have the power,
Right.
then it's right to be proud. But if you're in the majority, then you can't be proud.
Yep.
So once in 20 years, once we're 49.9% of the
Yes.
population,
Yes.
then white pride is all good. All
We're
right,
good to go.
that's what
Yep.
I've heard.
Yep.
That's whack, my friend.
That's the exact point I was just going to bring up. Yep.
No, they
Which
would never
it-
go that
it-
far. And you can ask them, and they'll tell you. They'll still say no.
Yep.
Yeah, but because
But he's
that would be
taking
giving
the
up power,
opinion
right?
that it's good to be proud of like your race when you're caveat, not you white person, but when you're the minority.
But these ideas were formed in an incubator that is completely godless and unmoored morally, right? It's relativistic, explicit.
seems Marxist, right?
CRT, yes, CRT is explicitly Marxist, morally relativistic, and it's all about power dynamics, right? And which is just an outgrowth of relativism. When you take it to its extreme, you end up in a nihilist, power-driven, where the only thing that matters is power. That's your society, and that's where these ideas come from. And so they have no place in the church. And this is a criticism that was brought up again and again to Tim Keller's face, and he never really backed down. He along with many other mostly white pastors felt the need to take the good and leave the bad, so to speak. That's how they would talk about it. Like, well, there's a lot of good stuff here. No, there's no good in reading Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility. There's no good in reading Ibram X. Kendi's, what's his actual name? I forget his actual name. It's some white-ass sounding name. But Ibram X. Kendi's book
Tim
on
Miller.
how to be an anti-racist. It's like these are bad books through and through. I mean, same with James, or what is it?
James Lindsay?
Cohen? No. I always forget his name. It might not actually be James. Let me look it up. Moses Cone. Yeah, okay. Moses H. Cone. There we go. There's no James in it. I don't know why I'm putting my own name on him. Moses H. Cone. He is the author of the concept of, what is it? Black.
Black Hebrew Israelites?
No, it's let me look it up again here. Moses
Yeah,
H.
okay, so another thing. Somebody brought that up in the chat though. Like whites are only what, 6% of the global population? 16% of the global population? Like it's a pretty small
Yeah,
number.
I think less than that.
It's like what?
It's liberation theology. Black liberation theology is the term, the concept. And CRT is very similar. I mean, liberation theology is very Marxist, pretty explicitly, and CRT is just a sort of secular version of that. But basically, Black liberation theology and all liberation theology is anti-Christian. I mean, if you read Moses Cone, who I have heard self-described conservative Christians express some approval of, this guy's books are just complete trash. He and so obviously not Christian. I mean, he will talk about how explicitly just be racist against white people and talk about how white people, if they want to have any good in them, need to become black, which whatever that means. But basically, he just equates blackness with goodness and whiteness with badness. And I mean, you can tell it's just all the power dynamics, right? Because he would assume that whiteness in the past has been used to basically refer to goodness, and so he's just flipping the script. It's all just power dynamics at play. And I mean, his books are basically unreadable, but if you understand what he's saying, it is just so overtly unchristian. He talks about let's see, I read one of his more famous ones and made notes just on every chapter of all of the heresies that he's spouting. But this is someone that Tim Keller and his ilk would have expressed respect and appreciation for. And I think Tim Keller may have been quoted as saying that he didn't fully understand the gospel until he read Moses Cone. And that's shocking for a Christian to say, because, like I said, there is nothing good here. And I don't say that lightly. Like, I can find the good in people, but this is just utter trash. So yeah, it's shocking to see these people try to take the good and leave the bad, because it especially for an inner city pastor like Tim Keller, he just feels like he needs to be more compassionate, or he needs to have more of a heart for black people. And I have no problem with that, but don't do so by compromising your morals and compromising your theology, which I feel like is what he did.
Well, right, because isn't that one of the things that Peter got called out for, was trying to essentially Judaize during the first century, right? And he was being hypocritical because he was catering to his Jewish constituents, essentially. And so he was Judaism is a heresy, right? We're not supposed to do that. We're not supposed to, not Christianize the Jews, right? That's not.
I found my notes here. So in chapter 1, he rejects. This is Moses Cone. He rejects Western rationality, so math and things like that. Rejects Christian tradition. Rejects God's providence. He says the eschatological promise of future glorification is insufficient to make up for present pain, and we cannot accept a God who inflicts or tolerates black suffering for some inscrutable purpose. I think that's a direct quote. It might be a slight paraphrase, but he says that. Rejects the God-centered approach to theology, right? He defines theology early in the book, and he rejects God-centered theology in favor of man-centered theology. He calls it anthropocentric.
Humanism, right?
Yeah,
we are the gods,
it's not Christianity, and that's all in chapter 1. Chapter 2 explicitly promotes violence, defines sources of black liberation theology. It says black history, black experience, black culture, and he doesn't, the Bible is sort of an afterthought. The meaning of biblical inspiration, according to him, is the Bible is inspired by reading it in a community, the Bible says the Bible is inspired by reading it in a community can encounter the risen Jesus and thus be moved to risk everything for earthly freedom. Right? So it's all about earthly freedom. There's no eschatology. There's no real heaven that he cares about. It's all just how can we make black people improve their earthly state. That's all he cared about. So it's not Christianity. It's so clearly not Christianity. And so how anyone in their right mind could actually consume this stuff and approve of it, one should call their credibility into question. And that's what I did. I've never read Tim Keller's marriage book. I haven't read any of his, supposedly good writings, because I just could not take this guy seriously.
Well, but if it's all about power dynamics, that bleeds into everything, including a marriage. Like, I could almost guess his marriage takes right away, right? It's some sort of equity or equality, right? Not
he would be
what's
like complementarian.
Well, complementarian, or even further than that in some cases, I would imagine.
Egalitarian. Yeah, I mean, he doesn't go so far as egalitarian, but Complementarian tends to be a pretty apologetic position.
I know Jake's talking about this. He asked me about it, but there was a black Reformed pastor, Vody.
Yeah, he died this week. Yeah, Vody
I
Baca.
am not. I was not familiar with him at all, so I don't know if you have thoughts on him. But Jake's asked multiple times in chat, so I thought I'd get your take on it.
He was cool. I haven't watched his stuff in a long time, but I know when I first heard about him, consumed some of his content. He was just a straight talking conservative black preacher. I think he's I don't think he's Presbyterian. I think he's Baptist, and I think he might be more in the John MacArthur line of Baptist preachers. So dispensational, but also Reformed, I think is his camp, but I don't know for sure. I know he also, in his recent life before he died this past week, he was preaching in Africa, I believe, and he really developed a heart for mission work there, but spent a lot of his time here in the U.S. Cool guy. Rest his soul.
Well, he says apparently his book Fault Lines is against CRT.
Oh yeah,
So
he was
it
very
says
strongly against CRT for sure.
Did he die of natural causes? Nothing crazy happened to him?
I think so. Yeah.
I think it was bad health. I think he was in his late 50s. It's kind of just
Yeah, I figured I'd ask because nowadays, yeah, it's kind of got to differentiate.
Well,
connection. But you don't sense it here because you're a majority. So if you take the Western individualism anyway, and you put on top of that the fact that if you're white in America, you've always been majority, you just don't get all this talk about corporate connection. That some members of the community can bring guilt on the whole community, and some members of the community can bring credit on the whole community, and we don't get it. But that's only because of our cultural myopia. Let me go one step further, though. And John has already alluded to this, and I'll get back to this in a minute. Go to Romans 5, and you get into the very heart of what's called classic federal theology. At the heart of classic Protestantism has always been
His original sin.
In Romans 5, Paul goes way beyond the idea that you are responsible for what other members of your family did, and he goes way beyond you are responsible for what other members of your culture do. He says you are responsible and you are condemned for what your ancestors Adam and Eve did. That is, just by virtue of being in the entire human race, you're responsible for things that you didn't individually do. You are condemned for what they do. And then, of course, he turns around and says, but by connection to Jesus Christ, you can be saved, not because of what you have done, but through your connection to him by faith.
Right. This is,
The
in legal
whole
terms, what they
structure
call
of the
an
gospel.
argument that proves too much. It's like, yes, you can apply it to that one case, but if you try to make that a general argument for how guilt and forgiveness are generally applied, you will end up with some wacky conclusions that seem to disprove the way you're using that argument. All right, an argument that proves too much.
right. Well, so if we're all dead in Adam, alive in Christ, so after we're do we still have guilt then after conversion? Like eternal guilt after conversion, and does that apply to whiteness as a whole? Pre and post Christian. So I don't really get what he's trying to say there, because it's like, okay, we're all guilty in Adam, but then we're all forgiven in Christ. So how
this
did-
is the already not
I'm
yet.
confused.
Well, but this is a Protestant Catholic dichotomy. I guess Orthodox, I'm not sure exactly where they fall into it, but I think they would probably be more along the lines of what Catholics would say. But, Luther's teaching of imputed righteousness does mean that really we are declared righteous if we are in Christ. And so, yes, we still sin, but those sins are, they're forgiven as well if we really are in Christ. And so, there is a real righteousness that is Christ's righteousness. It is not our own. Whereas Catholics would say, no, we are being made righteous, and there is still some part of us that is being made righteous. And then, even if we can't get all the way in this life, in purgatory, we get completely refined into righteous people. And so it's not just what Luther would call, or what maybe people after Luther would call, an alien righteousness being applied to us. It is our own righteousness coming from us through the grace of Christ. So it's all of grace, but whether it's of us or of Christ is the point in question. And I mean, that is a major issue that the Reformation turns about. So, I can't give you the correct answer unless it's Luther's, in which case I can give you that. But
Well, right, but in this guy's obviously a Protestant.
yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
So he's trying to apply Romans 5, talking about original sin, like of the corporate, like humanity, we have this sin, right? And then we also have forgiveness. So is he saying, but socially we still have this guilt, even though we're not socially forgiven, although we're like spiritually forgiven? Like, I'm not sure what he's trying to say here.
his
Actually.
argument is he's simply trying to point to an example in Scripture of corporate guilt or corporate forgiveness, or in this case, both. And so he's pointing to an example and saying, "Say, look, it's here. This is an example of corporate guilt or corporate forgiveness in Scripture. Therefore, this is something that we can talk about and apply to how we talk about race in America." He never
So
makes
is he
that
trying-
leap explicitly. He never explains why he can make that leap. But that's the argument. He's just pointing to Daniel 9, the Judges 5. He's just pointing to different passages and saying, "Look at all these examples of corporate guilt, corporate evil."
So how do we get corporate forgiveness in his example? That's my question. Because is there just like we say we're bad people or something, and then that's it? Like, what happens?
I think
I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously you get it through Christ in this example, but I don't know how we'd apply it to the race dynamics.
Right, to the corporate race. Like, how do I seek forgiveness for all white people?
It was based on corporate responsibility.
Although, I mean, I guess I could have like my family and my children come up and apologize to black people. Do you guys remember that?
Well, I mean,
sort of
legitimately,
thing?
you're expressing the
Yeah.
question that a lot of white Christians were expressing in 2020, and they found all kinds of wacky answers to that question, many of which involve things like that, going up to black people and asking forgiveness, or in a church setting, the white pastor would ask forgiveness to the black people. To have all the black people come to the front of all two black people in the Presbyterian church come to the front and ask their forgiveness. Things like that. It's
Just take
It's
the knee,
ridiculous.
man. Kneel down. There
Yeah,
you go.
yeah.
Mhm.
What? I don't even know how that's a proper method of forgiveness, though, because that's only for that one, or is that one black person a substitute for the black
federal
monolith?
head of all black people.
Well, is that like you seek forgiveness from like me, a white person, so I get forgiven for all white people? Does that person do I have to do it to every black person, or is there just
I
a
think you
black
have to do it to
monolith
every
that I
black
apply
person.
to?
Yeah.
Do I pray
And-
to this black monolith, to the prime black being that exists somewhere?
And
There's
it would be
actually,
helpful if you also gave money to all black people that you see. Just do your part
Okay,
for reparations. Yeah.
There's a black apology form you can print out and
Yeah, that's
mail
right.
out. Too.
Just hand it to people.
Responsibility. If you really want to go all the way down and say, I'm only responsible for what I have done and only I have done, there is no gospel. You see that? At the very heart of Protestant understanding, and I'm not saying it's not the heart of Catholicism, I'm not a Catholic and I can't go there actually, but I do know at the heart of Protestantism, the heart of, but by the way, Catholics do, and Greek Orthodox do come to this in a somewhat different way, that in the end, our salvation ends up being corporate. It's not something we earn. It's something that comes to us by being joined with Christ, but our sin is there.
But it's
not
applied
just
to us
because,
individually.
Of course, we do sin ourselves.
It's applied to us individually in every Christian framework, in every legitimate Christian framework. It's applied individually. And so this point makes no sense.
Mm-hmm.
But we're also sinful and condemned because of our being part of the human race. So at the very, very heart of the Bible, at the heart of theology, not just what the Bible says about you and your family, not just what the Bible says about you and your culture, but what the Bible says about you and the human race. How sin happens, how salvation happens. There's corporate responsibility. You got that? And if you don't understand that,
This just isn't. I just have to reject all of this, because if you go down this line of like white people have to be forgiven for their sins, but then that goes to every racial group, and then it's just everybody asking everybody at all times for eternity for forgiveness for something that happened 6,000 years ago. Like, there surely has to be a cutoff at some point. But in his idea is going to be, well, it's actually power dynamics, and you see, black people didn't have the power, so therefore they couldn't have done wrong at some nebulous point in the past, right? This is only for you, white man.
Yeah, I mean, that's where all these conversations break down.
To some degree, Western people and white people in particular don't realize to what degree they filter out all kinds of things the Bible says. They just don't see them, or they resist them because of that individualism. It's not biblical. It's not gospel. Let me go next step. Let's talk then about systemic evil. Here's what I mean by systemic. If you're part of a community, there are systems that the whole community, there's things that get done by the system. And you, by participating in the community, are to some degree getting that done, even if all you do, there's levels of responsibility. I'll give you these levels. You might be in the community and know exactly what the system's doing and be happy for it and actually actively doing it. Or secondly, you might kind of know what's happening in the system, and yet not, you don't think too much about it, but you're kind of in favor of it. Or number three, you know what's happening, but you don't do anything to stop it. Or number four, you don't really know what's happening and you don't care. And you don't even care to try to, find out about it. So for example, Holocaust. Okay, let's go to the Holocaust. At the top of the system, the Holocaust killed Jews, plus others, but because of the Jews right now. And it was a system. At the top of the system, at the most, you might say...
I know that the Holocaust gets brought up a lot, right, in different ways, but is it just because it's the most culturally relevant that that's always the one that gets brought up? Because, you can go back just a little bit before and go to the Holodomor, right, where 30 million Christians were killed or something like that. Do Jews have a corporate responsibility for the Holodomor?
Who was primarily in charge of the Bolsheviks?
Or the Armenian genocide? Like, I'm just asking questions here, okay? Do they have a corporate guilt for killing Christ? Or, anything else? I'm just asking questions here. And you can't say they didn't have power there with the Bolsheviks, right? Because they weren't in charge of a lot of the things. So it's...
Yeah, if you're going to go down this route, I think you end up having to go down that route, which is why I think that a lot of people that do...
That's a dangerous game to play, yeah.
Well, exactly. And I think that, the Jews killed Christ line, while it does have a lot of appreciation, depending on how far back you go in many respected church authors, I think you're playing with fire and you're playing with a system of guilt and punishment and forgiveness and mercy that I think starts to sound very, very similar to CRT if you continue down that road.
Yeah. Well, you end up going to bad bloodlines, which you're now in the Hitler camp. Congratulations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
it leads you down the same path, right? Yeah. It's like the horseshoe theory, right? Essentially, it's like we're eugenics, but nice guys, not like those eugenics. Those guys are the bad ones. It's
responsible. You had people that set up the death camps. Underneath that, you have guards and people who were in the death camps who were just following orders, as they said. Underneath that, you had people in the town, civic leaders, who kind of knew what was happening there, but they didn't want to know. Though very often, after the war, some of them committed suicide when they actually saw what was happening in the camp, because they kind of knew, but they had no idea exactly, and so forth. And then you go down to the citizen, the German citizen, who had heard rumors but didn't want to know and didn't do anything about it and just paid their taxes and worked. Don't you see that at the one end, you've got people who are more responsibly, more corporately responsible. At the bottom, a little less corporately responsible, but only all those people died because the whole system was working.
So pause
everybody who was in this...
Again, an argument that just doesn't make sense. The basis for being more or less corporately responsible, using that term corporately responsible, is your individual participation in it. So he's still talking about individual responsibility, but just using the term corporate responsibility. He's talking about your individual participation in the system's bad, in its evil, is the basis for whether or not you're more or less responsible. That's just individual responsibility.
Correct. You're back to that again.
He's not making that point. He's not making the point that he is saying that he's making.
Because if we go down the gradients line, like everything's on a spectrum, okay? So sin's on the spectrum, okay?
Gender's on the spectrum,
Right, exactly. Well, you might say that, right? But anyways, if we talk about like my own personal level of interaction with slavery, 170 years removed, like, do I have to have like 0.125% apologetics for slavery, right? Because I'm so far removed versus like actual slave owners who like whip their slaves, right? That's at 100%. And then every step removed, 170 years down that line, it's got to be basically nothing. So can I be like, oh yeah, I'm kind of like generically sorry that slavery happened or something, and is that enough? Is that enough of an apology? Like, yeah, generically it's bad or something.
Yeah.
Is that the level of guilt that I have at this point? I don't know. Or
You
is he
gotta
saying
ask
just
the black person.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Well, is black on a spectrum?
No.
No, it's not. Okay, so is a 12%
It's a
black
toggle.
person black?
Yeah.
It's the toggle on off.
System. Everybody who wasn't resisting the system was part of it because the system couldn't have killed all those people unless everybody was doing their job, even just looking the other way. Got that? Let me go down a step. When I moved to a little town in Virginia in the 1970s, one of the things I discovered, but I didn't really think much about, was there were 6 city councilmen, women, city council members, and they were elected at large. 25 to 30% of the population of the town was black. But because they weren't elected by region or neighborhood, they were elected at large by the whole community, they were all 6 white. The rationale was, we don't want that awful word politics where everybody's fighting. And because the whole community is electing everybody, every single council member is representing the whole group. But the fact of the matter was, of course, that the poor part of the city, the poor part of the town, the school over there, the black part of town was just being absolutely starved of resources. Now, at the top of this system were councilmen and people like that who really knew exactly what they were doing. But very important to the system was a young northern white pastor in his 20s and 30s who kind of knew about it and never really asked and just continued to support it just by not putting up any kind of fuss and just participating in the elections, etc. It wasn't until years later that I looked back on the thing. By the way, that went away in 1983. But looking back, the year after I left, looking back on the thing, I realized, wait a minute, what was I doing? I was part of a system. Did I experience some corporate responsibility? Absolutely. In the narrow, I was responsible for something that was keeping the people down, the poor black people in that town down. Partly because I didn't care enough to really think about it.
He's the pastor that never
In the
asked, right?
broad,
That's his-
Right.
Right. So he's taking, but he's taking personal responsibility for that action, for that sin of omission, if that's what it was. But certainly is how he sees it. That's not
Or
corporate
complacency.
evil.
Not.
Yeah.
Do you mean omission as in complacency? Like
Yeah,
just
omission,
not doing anything?
Right. A
right?
sin of omission is when you don't
Of
do
like-
something, whereas
right,
sin of commission is
inaction,
when you do
basically.
something. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Okay. I see what you're saying. What you're saying. Okay. Well, but I know that he's not going to agree with this, right? But like, let's say if it's 25% black, 25% Mexican, and 50% like generic white, right? But if there's
no
two-
diversity in white people.
but that's the thing, right? But if you have 4 council positions and 2 of them are black, 2 of them are white, are the blacks also keeping the Hispanics down because they're overrepresented? Or is just the fact that the people elected certain council people intrinsically holding people down? Like, I don't get it.
representation, it's okay. So as long as you have like all white people, but some of them are gay, you're fine.
Well, because there is a point system. Like,
Yeah.
for
Oh, yeah,
instance,
for sure.
Hollywood has a legitimate point system for hiring. So they actually have a certain number that they need to hit. And so if you are a white, you get 0 points. If you are gay, though, you get 1 point. If you are black and gay, it is 2 points. If you are black, gay, and a female, you get 3 points. If you're black, gay, female, transgender, you get 4 points. So there's like a legitimate like higher, like what do they call it? DEI hierarchy or something like that. But the pinnacle is a black, gay, transgender woman.
I use the same system for the people I hang out with, but it's negative points.
It's
instead.
it's flipped.
Yeah.
It's flipped, right?
Yeah.
It's like golf in that respect. We're trying to keep the points as low as possible.
By being a white man in the South in the 1970s, and I actually had an elder in my church whose father had fought in the Civil War. You can figure that out. It actually happened. He was in his 70s, His father had fathered him when he was 65. He had lied about his age and got into the Civil War at the age of 14. But by gosh, I had a a guy whose father was a Civil War veteran in 1975 on my session. So the Civil War wasn't that far back. And for any white person in that town, it was so obvious that so many of the poor black people in that town were in that situation over the generations because of slavery. For me to say, I don't have anything to do with that, I don't have any responsibility to do something about their plight is just unbiblical. There are also, let me just give you need to look. What I mean by systemic evil, here's a definition. It is a system that excludes and marginalizes people on the basis of race, even though most of the individuals in the system are not probably intentionally trying to do it. The individuals aren't intentionally trying to do it, but they're part of a system that's doing it. And therefore there's guilt, and therefore there's systemic evil. So for example...
Whoa. Like a jump to evil? Okay, so going back to that primary example, the example beforehand, right? I lost my train of thought there. I looked up for a second and I just blanked on what I was going to say. It'll come back to me in a second.
No, but you're right. It is a jump. He's there's something.
Oh, okay.
I don't think you can call it guilt on a spiritual level. But you do bear some amount of I don't know what the best term is. There's some you may bear the consequences. You probably should bear the consequences. You may not, but you might bear the consequences of an evil that is present in your society. That's that's totally just, and that's just how it is. But that does not equate to spiritual guilt in need of personal forgiveness seeking, which is what this type of thinking was used to support. Personal forgiveness seeking for corporate evil.
Right. So this is kind of a revolutionary mindset, though, and I don't mean revolutionary like Revolutionary War. I mean like to tear down the system as it stands. So in his case, for it to be equitable, like let's say again we have an 85% majority of whatever race is in power, right? But you still can't silence the other voices. So you have to actually bend the rules or get rid of the rules in place to give them something, right? So whether not just talking about reparations, talking like let's say there's 4 councilwomen, right, or councilmen, whatever it might be. You have to say, well, actually, 4th white person that would have won that, you actually have to, using force, I suppose, stop that person from winning, and then give it to someone else unelected, right? So you have to get out of the system.
This is more a case of gerrymandering, where basically the community was voting for council people at the entire community level, all 6 people, rather than voting for community council members from their own local community. So I think he's saying that they should have divided it up into districts within the community and then had the people within that district vote for their representative, because that would have created a more representative leadership board or council, rather than having the entire community, which was majority white, vote for all 6 council members, because that leaves the black people as not particularly represented. So that's the
correct.
That's the solution.
But
he's not saying
if the white people vote no, though, you have to actually say, well, we're going to destroy the system and rebuild it in an equitable way, right? So that's what I mean by a revolutionary mindset, right? Yeah. The current framework does not work. We're going to tear it down to make it equitable, which is, I think, when you get down to it, that's what a lot of these people actually believe. And I don't know if they understand that that road is paved in blood, right? So this kind of generic kind niceness thing, the fruits of this, like the actual actions that come from this mindset, well, you see it in Marxism throughout the last, century or more at this point. I think the fruits of this are objectively evil.
The people at the academic level pushing this stuff absolutely know that and will say it outright. Like they are very
that's where it's where it has to lead, right?
Yeah.
Example. Let me give you a mini system. I knew a man who was the head of a car dealerships, a set of car dealerships in the South, And the car dealerships, the way in which things were done was you could come in and negotiate, and the salesman had a pretty big window of what they could give you the car for. So they would negotiate, and you would negotiate, and it was a way of, it was a lot of horse trading going on, except it was car trading, I guess. And the salesmen couldn't go lower than this, but they could get this high. And so it was partly, it was a tradition. Somebody did some research and found out that men always were better negotiators with the salesmen than women, and white men and black men were better negotiators than African American women. And so when somebody actually looked at what was going on, African American women were regularly paying far more for their cars, and were actually subsidizing the price of what white men were paying for cars in that particular town. And so they realized that even though nobody thought they were doing something, if the result was unjust, and it was unjust, then even though there was nobody in there who originally had said, let's do it this way, because that way we will really
result unjust?
hurt African.
That was going to be my question. It's like, if I'm an employer and one guy asks for $18 an hour and the other woman asks for $17 an hour, and I say yes to both,
show me the injustice.
I do agree with him that this does play out. The reason why women are worse at negotiations is because in general, they want to get along more. They are more conflict averse, right?
More timid, yeah.
Negotiations are conflict, right? I have wants that I want to win, right? I want to win this negotiation and get the best deal for myself possible, right? My tolerance for conflict is in general higher than most women's conflict, like in general, right? So yeah, when you're negotiating for a car, for a position, for a raise, for whatever it might be, men in general are going to perform better in those scenarios. Now you can say, well, you shouldn't be taking advantage of these people, but I don't even know if you can say it's taking advantage of them, because they came on your lot to buy a thing. They said yes to buy the thing. And it's not like one person walks in and they're paying $10,000 for a car, and the other person walks in, it's a black lady, $100,000, right? You're going to pay it 22% APR. How about that? Right. It's like, we're talking like there might be a 10 or 15% delta there, right? And I mean, is that immoral? Like, I personally don't like that, but I sell things like because I have a company, right? I just sell like the price is the price. And I like that more because I don't like dealers. I don't like haggling. There's something about that for me that I just dislike. But if you agree to it, like, do they not have agency? Because this is another thing for these people, for these like white pastors and preachers that push this kind of nonsense. Do they believe that the black woman is inferior in her agency? And do they believe it is their job as a white savior to change the hearts and minds of people because these people can't do it themselves, so I must do it for them? It's kind of like, what do they call it? The bigotry of low expectations.
Right.
And it's again, you get into the situation where it's like, well, maybe we agree, but for vastly different reasons.
So to Jake's point, I was going to bring that up too. It's kind of a cultural thing as well, where black women are only, I think 22% of them are married, whereas white women are over 50%. So if you have a husband, he's probably going to go in your place to negotiate. So yeah.
Now,
do I blame black men for that, or do I blame black husbands for that, or husbands of black women for that? Like, who do I blame for this?
Out of
the generic white monolith
of just ministry or charity, changing your policies to make this kind of thing, this I wouldn't call it an injustice, but this outcome that seems less than ideal and perhaps isn't something that you want to continue. If you want to change that out of a sense of charity, that's totally fine. That's well within your right as a business owner to change the system so that it doesn't end up in this sort of icky result. But I don't think there's any moral injustice that's happening here when a person pays, assuming there's no line involved, which with car salesmen you never really know, but assuming that everything is being done in an honest fashion otherwise, then people paying the price that they agree to for a particular product is perfectly moral.
I mean, that seems reasonable to me, because even like there are parables about good investments, right? Being wise with your money and that sort of thing. Right. So I don't think that making money or being wise with your investments or whatever you're doing is a bad thing. Right. So I'm not I'm not the sort of person who is like anti-profit. Right.
Right.
And there people make lots of money and do great for their family and community. Fantastic. Right. I don't want that to be strictly the goal for everybody, but I think that as a car dealership, as a salesman, like you making money for your family, and if you're doing the Christian thing, you're tithing and you're putting into your community, stuff like that, that's not even a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, personally, I just don't like that, you know. But for the individual, I can't tell you that's actually sinful to try and make the most money for you and your family and your company as you can.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to owning a business, setting the price is one of the hardest things to do because it's, you know, it's the easiest thing to change, and in theory, change your bottom line. I mean, I guess technically the easiest thing is to reduce costs, right? When you reduce costs, every single penny that you lower your cost, that goes directly to your bottom line. When it comes to price, if you increase the price, you only get the percentage that is your margin that goes to your bottom line. But even still, it's a costs are tangible. There's actually something that you have to do a lot of work to reduce costs. Price, you could just make up whatever price you want. So in that sense, it's the easiest to change in order to change your bottom line. And in businesses where there is a certain amount of price discrimination that is allowed, not actual discrimination, but just sort of, you know, a system that allows for, like airlines, where they can charge different prices for the same good, you know, because of the different, you know, what day you bought it or when you bought it, based on volume. It's really helpful when you can do that because different people will pay different things for the same product. It's worth something different to each person, and if you can exploit that, then that can be really, really helpful.
Well, I don't even like the car example is probably even a bad one because when it comes to cost, it's negotiating down, right? It's not the price usually because there's a sticker price, right?
Right.
That's the price. You can negotiate it down, but it's not usually it's not like, oh, for you, here's an extra 10 grand. Now they might not understand everything. So, and also something else that factors into this is credit score. So like if your terms are worse, well, is it because your credit score is worse? Yeah. And isn't that based off of your individual actions? But again, he would put that, well, credit score has actually been used historically to keep black people down. So that's actually also your fault, white guy.
Everything's your fault.
Yeah, yes.
American women, but they were hurting African American women. There's two things you can do. On the one hand, you could say, because we're not deliberately trying to hurt African.
Sorry, what's up? Oh, I'm stupid. I'm watching it on my screen like, nice. This is nice.
African American women, and we make better profits this way. We have no responsibility. But the owner, a Christian man, said we do. And he changed the model. He changed the whole approach. His own profits have gone down, but he says it's the only way to be just. Have you got the eyes to see systemic evil? Or are you a typical white Westerner? I know a lot of you aren't white.
And I mean, I think that's nice of him to do, right? As a business owner saying, we're just going to, you know, no haggling, no price reductions for different people, no negotiations. Even though we might be able to get more sales by doing that, we're just not going to do that. Like, I think that's generically nice, right? In a way, although you could say, well, what if somebody came in and they did like actually want to get a lower price, but to them you're saying, no, you must pay the higher price. We're not even going to negotiate
for someone
with you.
like me, I prefer where I can be able to haggle, but yeah.
Right, of course. Yeah, because I mean, like I've walked into car dealerships, asked for stuff, and then they say no, and I'm like, okay, well, fine, yeah, we're going somewhere else then, of course.
I'm looking for a car right now, and I went into a place and I drove the car, liked the car, and I was ready to do a little negotiation. He was like, "Oh no, we're a no hassle, no haggle dealership." I was like, "Oh, okay,
oh, well,
the price is
fine,
too high."
Yeah.
So,
okay.
All right.
Well, I'm in no position to buy then. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, it's like that's great and all, but the guy down the road has it for $5,000 less. So, like, do you want to haggle
And
or
he'll
no?
probably negotiate. Yeah.
And he'll negotiate. So, like, all right, that's the crazy thing because, like, again, car's just a bad example because you can just look up the sticker price like everywhere and just find whichever one, the dollar number when it's the lowest, like that's the one to buy.
A lot of you aren't Westerners, but I'm particularly looking to you. Do you have the eyes to see that kind of thing? And if you do see them, do you take responsibility? Now, lastly, how does the
This
gospel
is unironically what I'm trying to do right now.
actually
Buy an old Lexus.
address this? On the one hand, you've got to keep in mind that just converting some individual with the gospel, if the system needs to be dealt with, won't be enough to deal with racism. I mean, to me, the most dramatic example of that was Robert Linthicum some years ago wrote a book called City of God, City of Satan. He tells a true story about how when he was a young man, a kind of a minister student, he spent a summer doing evangelism and ministry in a big city. He met a girl named Eva who was from the projects. She was from a very poor background, a black girl, African American. She became a Christian under his ministry. He put her in a Bible study. She was growing, went back to school, seminary, college, something like that. A year later, came back to see his friends and found out that Eva had gone into prostitution. He found her.
Sorry, did you say pause it?
No, he said prostitution, not posit.
Oh, yeah.
He started berating her. He started saying, why didn't you keep going to your Bible study? And then she said, men came, told me I looked good, said they wanted me to be a prostitute, and if I wasn't, they would beat up my father and my brother. And this is Robert Linthicum, the author, saying, so I said to her, Eva, that's just terrible. You should have trusted God and gone to the police. And she said, it was the police who came and said they were going to beat up my father and my brother. What was I going to do? And Linthicum said, I suddenly realized I don't think it's going to be enough to help her just by converting her and getting her into a Bible study. I've got to do something about the system. There's a corrupt system going on here. And of course, black and Hispanic women were being used
this
this
is
way.
actually
Now,
a good
that's
point. This is beside his initial point, but this actually is an important moral concept and something just in terms of ethics, in terms of how we actually live out our moral principles. This is important to recognize that bad systems will lead to people doing bad things, and the level of culpability is in some way diminished. Now, I have no idea in terms of God's bookkeeping. I don't know, but this is how I view so many women that have been told all their lives that babies in the womb are not babies; they're just a clump of cells. They get it aborted. Some of them feel guilt afterwards. Many of them do, certainly, but many don't. They have been so brainwashed into thinking that this is normal. And I'm not saying that how much guilt you feel is an indicator of how wrong it was, but that just goes to show that the system has corrupted people, and it's the same way that I think about slavery in the past, right? How could George Washington, who wrote, who gave his life for, or was willing to give his life in pursuit of freedom for the American people, but he couldn't understand why his slaves kept trying to escape, right? He thought, well, I'm taking care of them. Why would they want to escape? Now, he eventually did free them in his life, and there were potentially some reasons why he legally couldn't let them go or whatever, but still, he clearly was missing something about the injustice of the system that he was living in. And when it's like a fish swimming in water, does the fish actually see the water? You can't, if you're in the system like that, so entrenched, you often don't realize the evils that you're participating in. And so I'm sure there are all kinds of things that we will, our children will look back on our generation and see that we were doing all kinds of wrong things. And abortion certainly would be one of them in a corporate sense, in a national sense. But there are probably other things that we do now that are horribly unjust and we shouldn't be doing. I think every generation looks back, and that's why you can't judge previous generations with our current standards, because there is a certain amount of grace we should give to people who, yes, commit personal sins, but in a system in which they really don't know better, or even if they do know better, they don't know how to get out of that system. And so you'll see that all the time. And so absolutely we should have grace for people, so many prostitutes and OnlyFans girls and that are caught up in this system, and they really do think that this is the only option. I'm not saying that to take away the personal guilt, but there's a lot of that, and I think this is an actual good ethical point that he's making. It just doesn't. It still doesn't really go to show his overall point about corporate guilt, but it is an important ethical consideration.
What's interesting is this actually is just a personal responsibility question, isn't it? Because he knows of a bad situation going on with one of his parishioners, right? One of the people in his community, right? So he has now the personal responsibility to do something for. Now, I know people in the chat were questioning the validity of his story. That's actually not relevant to the question, because we've seen cops run weird sex scandals out of the back of police cruisers with inmates and stuff like that. So this type of thing absolutely happens. Prostitution, sex trafficking, this sort of thing happens all over the country. Whether or not this instance is actually completely accurate and correct is kind of dodging the actual question of it. So in a way, yeah, it's like if you there's a parable, right? If you only say to your brother who's sick and naked, well, go and be filled, right? That's actually not enough. You actually do have a responsibility to actually feed them, to clothe them, to take care of them. So if you know of this woman who's in this bad situation, it is your responsibility to try and do something for her, right? Whatever that might be.
Right.
Yeah. Which is, again, personal, not communal. Now, unless the community knows about it, then it could be like a communal issue that you need to take up or something like that.
No, what he's describing is the fact that the system makes it very hard to do the right thing. And that's true. But it's still your personal responsibility to do what you can to change the system, to work within the system to make it better, or potentially in some drastic cases to rebel against the system and to totally tear it down. So, our earthly, the miasma of sin that we live in makes living a godly life hard. Doesn't take away the responsibility, but it's still personal responsibility.
A particularly dramatic, very vivid. I try to show you the car dealership to show you the systemic racism can happen at all kinds of levels, almost at an unconscious level, but there it is. At the other end, that's very, very, obvious. But it just goes to show you got to do something about systems. You can't just simply say, we're just going to convert everybody and convict them of the individual sin of racism, everything will be okay. Here's three things that three ways the gospel, I think, can address this. Number one, you already heard me say something about this. If you begin to understand gospel theology, the idea that a lot of people say that the very doctrine that Adam and Eve's sin is imputed to me, so I'm guilty, and now when I believe in Jesus Christ, not only are my sins put on Christ, but his righteousness is put on me, and I'm clothed in the righteousness of Christ. I've seen people criticize in reviews of John's book saying Reformed theology, Protestant theology, classic imputed righteousness theology is individualistic and it's no help. And I'm trying to say, are you kidding? Have you read this? To me, the reason that I have been able to get beyond my individualism,
pause for a second.
to think in terms.
So, this is just wrong, though. Racism is a sin. I guess it depends on how you define racism.
That would be my next point is, what do you mean by racism?
Right. But,
Because
I think it's pretty simple. Judging the individual corporately in a personal way for the sins of someone else, right? Judging the son in terms of the forgiveness guilt side, the spiritual side, for the sins of the father is wrong. Judging an individual within a group for the overall characteristics of the group in a spiritual way is wrong. I'm not in a temporal way, perhaps, in terms of the split decisions you have to make about like racial profiling and whatnot. That's not necessarily wrong, and I don't think that's necessarily. I wouldn't call that racist. So there's it does come down to a definitional concept, but I think that one should be careful because the word racism does have a negative connotation, and it's kind of like the word lust, where some people, if you try to use the word lust in a way that excuses it, like it's okay to, basically if you say it's okay to lust, and I know people here wouldn't, but I've heard like back when Dennis Prager said the thing about porn, which was was wrong what he said, but even still, he was using the term lust in a positive way. And it's like, no, what he didn't understand is that the term lust has a negative, sinful connotation, like almost to the point where lust means looking sinfully at a woman, right? So you can't define that as being not sinful. And racism is kind of the same thing, where it's like it is a type of prejudice that is sinful. Now, if you define it that way, of course, you can't say that it's not sinful. But that certainly is how it's used. And so to use it in some other novel way will really take away from your argument, in the same way that Dennis Prager trying to argue that a certain type of, looking at a woman might not be wrong, but using the word lust to describe that, it really hurts your argument, whether or not it's a good argument or not.
To the question that's, well, not necessarily a question, a statement that's on screen, the early church fathers, as well as the Catholic Church, didn't necessarily look down on Jews for their race. It was more so for their theological views and their heresies, just to make a point.
Well, so, and I think what James said there is correct, but I want to be very narrow with the word racism, though, because racism gets leveled at everyone for everything under the sun, right? So if like you see like in my town or somewhere, if you see like a black guy like walking down the street and you like intrinsically hate that individual with like a burning hatred when he's like out like walking his dog or something, like we can all say like, okay, that's wrong, right? But if I say, well, listen, there are some general statistics or like general attributes that different races have, not even positive or negative, okay? If I say like the average height in Norway is 6'2", it's the tallest country in the world, right? That's just a fact, okay? It's not racism, and I don't hate them for that, okay? So, I mean, having preferences, I don't think is racism. I think that's normal,
Racial
natural.
thinking is not a sin.
No, and well, because it's just part of the world, right? I don't get upset because evergreen trees are green year round, right? That's part of their like ontological nature. I don't hate them for that. Now, it might be my preference to live around pine trees, right, or something like that. But that's just recognizing what is real is not racism, right? So, it's like what's funny is oftentimes some of the most racist people of all time have had like people from different races that they quite respected, right, in different ways. But they realized that, like, in general, right, they had preferences for the way they wanted their society to be run, for the way they wanted their nation to be, for the way they wanted their future to be, right? So some of these like boogeyman racist are actually like not what I would even define as racist, right?
Yeah, fair point.
In terms of corporate responsibility is because of the gospel. It gives anybody who really digs down into it the ability to see that God sees things happening through communities, through bodies, not just simply through individual.
Well, on that point, like God selects nations and peoples to rise and to fall. So like nationalism is something I am 100% for every nation, right? I believe it is you have a duty to your nation. Like I would go so far as that.
My favorite nationalist point is the poem from Sir Walter Scott, which reads, "Breathes there." I'm not quoting this from memory. I'm reading it off the screen. I just pulled it up. "Breathes there a man with soul so dead, who never to himself hath said, 'This is my own, my native land,' whose heart hath ne'er within him burned, as home his footsteps he hath turned, from wandering on a foreign strand. If there such breath go, mark him well, for him no minstrel raptures swell. High though his titles, proud his name, boundless his wealth, as wish can claim. Despite those titles, power and pelf, the wretch concentred, all in self, living shall forfeit fair renown, and doubly dying shall go down to the vile dust from whence he sprung, unwept, unhonored, and unsung." Pardon my bad poetic reading there, but it's just a great poem about, anyone who doesn't yearn for his own land is dead inside. In the same way that you have a particular affinity for your own mother, right? Whether she's the best mom or not, you think of her as the best mom. Or even if you don't, you still have a particular love and grace for her that you wouldn't have for anyone else that you're not related to, and you should. If you don't, then you are dead inside in a certain way.
Yeah.
And that is a wrong thing. And in that same way, affinity for your nation is a good. That is a good thing.
Yeah, not only that, but that's what makes the world a beautiful place is all the different cultures and nations. Like I've been probably to the majority, I've traveled around the majority of the world except for Europe. And when I was in Thailand, the Thai people are some of the nicest, most kind people I've ever met in my life. When I went to Africa, you know, their houses were made out of clay with tin roofs. Like it's just, and there were still some beautiful aspects to Africa as well, but it's just every place has its cultural aspects that make it, you know, beautiful. If I go to Italy, I want Italian food. And
Right.
So-
Well, yeah, ironically, as the most racist man on the panel, I'll take that title for myself. Okay. I actually want to preserve the different nations' races, like generically as they are. Right.
yeah.
Hook had a quote about John Chrysostom, St. John, from the 4th century, blocking Constantine's Jew wife from entering the church due to do communion based on her not being Catholic, but it was because of her race being a Jew. It's important to remember that church fathers and saints still aren't infallible
They made mistakes.
in a lot of ways. They make mistakes. And also, important to remember, 4th century, wild time for the Eastern Empire, okay? They were kicking Jews out of everything. Now, keep in mind, Jews and Romans have a crazy history. Like 250 years prior to that, there was the Jewish revolt, which saw the temple being burned and all of that sort of stuff happen. And then in the 4th century, I believe, is when they kicked them out of all positions of power. So this was a heightened racial tensions at an all-time high, okay? All right. And newly converted empire, lots of things moving on. And also, it's important to remember that these people are not infallible, right? And also, a lot of the apostles were Jews. You know, it's like the Jews aren't just ontologically evil. As much as like people on the right like to meme about that. Well, it's Palestinian, or whatever we gonna say. But yeah, I don't believe that Jews are ontologically evil. Okay. It's sorry for that hardline stance there. I know everybody on the right just sighed a little, but yeah, I don't believe they're ontologically evil.
Yeah, well, and you'll even
They just
see
have a tendency to be.
It just so happens that all the media and all right.
Well, yeah, it's just okay. I'm just pointing out some statistics. Okay, so that's the thing. Like racism isn't pointing out facts, right? It's just the way nature is sometimes, and God made it that way. It's not my fault.
I do legitimately think that there's a lot more, let's say, conspiracy of interest than actual conspiracy going on, and there are certain there are racial prerequisites to success, and
I agree with you.
the
Right?
Jews just happen to check some of the right ones at the right time, and
Well, yeah, but I agree. I agree with you. But pointing that out isn't racist or anti-Semitic. I'm
not.
just saying
Exactly.
these people are really good at certain things.
I'm saying that as a counterpoint to conspiratorial thinking. Not that all conspiratorial thinking is wrong, but very often it's just noticing patterns that can be explained in other ways and only seeing the possible explanation as conspiracy or genes or discrimination, right? That's the mistake that the leftists make is, well, both sides of the leftists make. You know, you have the pre-Hitler leftists making the eugenics argument on the basis of genes, right?
Darwinian evolution.
Exactly. And then you have the post-Hitler leftists that realized maybe that won't play too well in Peoria, so let's pivot, and now it's all discrimination. But if you only look for simple explanations for complex issues when there's actually a number of things that factor in, then you know you're it might rock some of your conspiracies.
Actions. And so on the one hand, I'd say the gospel theology gives people, even those of us from the most individualistic background, the spectacles through which we can finally start to see things we never saw before. We can look at things in other ways other than just simply individual rights, individual actions. Number one. Number two, the gospel changes your identity so that you are less sucked in to the social system around us, which tends to be racist. Michelle Alexander, in her book, The New Jim Crow, points out that gangster rap culture, this is her view, and she's a sociologist and all that. She's not a psychologist, but I think she's right here. Gangster rap culture is a way for stigmatized people desperately trying to do something about their low self-image, and they are embracing the identity given to them by the society as criminals. So they embrace
That's
beating up.
probably true.
I think there might be an element to that, but I also think it's a gay CIA psyop. And most of these quote unquote gangster musicians were actually just all gay. All of them were gay. Like there was a lot of nonsense going on in the music industry.
Nice try, Diddy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, who created gangster rap? And, it's also, okay, we're going back to the Jew talk here. Okay, I'm just saying a lot of the music labels were owned by certain people. Okay, that's all I'm saying. Okay, right? It's just a matter of record.
Women in violence and are proud of it. And it's a desperate way for people to say, okay, you're going to treat me as a criminal, I'm going to revel in being a criminal. But of course, all it does is it digs them in deeper. They got to have an identity that even if they do go to prison, keeps them from being sucked into what the culture is telling them about themselves. On the other hand, Bill Stuntz recently has died, unfortunately, and he was a great scholar of criminal law at Harvard University. He wrote a book that came out after he died called The Collapse of American Criminal Justice. It's an amazing book. And he points out that in the 1840s, he says, police forces were invented. You know why? Because of the Irish. The Irish showed up in the
Based Irish racism.
1840s. They came here because of the potato famine. They came into the big cities, and there was all this violence, and everybody said, oh my gosh, the Irish. They were the very first, they were the first urban criminal culture. And actually, police forces were invented.
Okay, so this actually goes to a deeper point, right? So when people say like white people, like I don't believe that all white people get along, like racially, right? So I'm from the Midwest, huge German population here, right? And sporadically in different areas of the country, you have different like actual ethnic groups settling, right? And so Irish culture didn't mesh all that well with like whatever cultures were already here, English, German, or whatnot, right? So it's
Not
different
only
cultures,
culture,
different
it's
people.
a religious thing too, because predominantly Irish were Catholic, and then Germans and whatnot were probably Protestant. So a big religious conflict as well.
That as well, right? Yeah. There's like 5 centuries of conflict between Protestants and Catholics at that time. So I mean, yeah, there's lots of other things.
Mm-hmm. The Irish hate you guys.
Yeah.
So
To deal with them.
before we finish this video, have you guys, something that he said several minutes back reminded me of this, but have you guys seen the Key and Peele slave auction sketch?
Yes, where they get annoyed that they're like
Christian hasn't
they're like
watched that.
offended.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
we're
so
gonna
funny.
get copyright striked for it, but it doesn't matter because we're not monetized
We're
anyway.
so
So
far.
we'll just play it anyways. Have you never seen that, Christian?
Probably a long time ago.
It's
but I would
one of
like
my
to see it
favorite
again.
Key and Peele sketches.
It's very good. Yes, they
Does
get.
Does it beat out the Dave Chappelle episode 1?
I
the
mean,
black, white
that's a great
supremacist?
one too.
Yeah.
This one's a little more punchy, a little more snappy.
Okay. That's wild.
Watch it at the end.
That's wild to think that was
Okay,
Dave
we can watch
Chappelle's
it at the
first episode.
I know, yeah, it's so good.
But he pointed something out. Over a period of 20 years, he said Irish criminals were tried by Irish juries. They were tried by Irish judges. They were arrested by Irish policemen and Irish district attorneys. In other words, it says the Irish community was empowered to actually deal with their own crime problem, and they got on top.
Okay, is he arguing for segregation? Because again, it's going to be horseshoe theory, where maybe I agree with you. Maybe we should have separate societies. It's like, I don't think that's what he means, though.
Of it. But these inner city black communities are not empowered to do that because the criminal justice system, he says, is in the hands of white people, and particularly white suburbanites, people who don't even live there. And he makes a long list of the ways in which the criminal justice system is absolutely broken. And it's one of the reasons why you know, black male incarceration rates are far higher than they were just a generation ago, far higher. He says it's
No, that's
absolutely
BS.
broken until.
Well,
It's because of black fatherless homes and actual black crime. It's not because of the
What is wild-
incarceration.
it's under incarceration. They get per
Serious under incarceration.
well, which is tragic to think about too, because a lot of people just get let out and then they do the same things over and over and over and over again. You know, they commit
Stab a
14
woman on a
felonies.
Charlotte bus.
Yeah, they commit 14 felonies and just get asked to appear at a court date at some point, and then they murder a woman on a train.
Yeah.
Tragically. But yeah, for the same crime, they get lower prison sentences, like on average. And he says that the justice system is broken against them, but in a lot of ways, you just stack the jury with members of that specific race, and they have a higher chance of getting off because they're from that specific race, right? So in a way, like the justice system is almost segregated. Like prosecutors and defense attorneys try and move the trial to wherever is best for their client, right, or the best for their case, right?
No,
So I mean, this
like
sort of
some
thing happens both ways. Like the justice system just gets taken advantage of by everybody.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think it's
some of these books that he's referencing and the stats that people will reference might have been true in the 80s, right? Like I remember reading Just Mercy, a book by, I forget the guy who wrote it, but you know, I think there probably were times where there may have been a bias against black people, not that went beyond simply the overrepresentation in crime statistics of black men. But that's certainly not the case today. Today, it is a serious bias in the other direction to let black people off the hook for all kinds of crimes. So I think it certainly can cut both ways. I'm not saying that you can't look back in history and find times where it may have been biased against black men. Perhaps unjustly so. But yeah, it's certainly not the case today. And the root cause of the issue is fatherless homes in the black community. Just is.
Yeah. Well, I think it's crazy that after the Civil Rights Act, the quote unquote like equality movement, you know, feminism, black rights, all this sort of stuff, like their situation just got worse the more power they got, which is, kind of strange. And essentially what again, this is another part where I said about his revolutionary mindset. What he's advocating here is two separate justice systems. Like inner city blacks get their own justice system with their own judges and their own policemen, and essentially like their own micro governments, I suppose. And then white suburbanites have theirs. What he's advocating is like a weird form of, again, you've circled all the way back to segregation, but in a empowered sense, quote unquote.
You know, separate but equal.
Yeah.
White people begin to realize that they are us. He actually says, Michelle Alexander does the same thing at the end of her book, saying that the criminal justice system right now is a disaster for black people in general and black males in particular. And she says there isn't any way out of it unless white people get some kind of new understanding, some new understanding that we are together, some new humility, some new sense of care and love. There's a place in James 1, verse 9, that says, the poor believer, this is a paraphrase, but the poor believer should take pride in his high position, and the rich believer should take pride in his low position, because he's going to pass away like a flower of the field. And probably what that is saying is this: if you are a Christian, affluent person, you should remember that you are a sinner. That's one of the things the Bible says. If you are a poor person and you become a Christian, you should remember that you are a child of the King. You should think of your high position. The gospel takes white people and keeps them from really getting their identity from their place in the society. And it takes poor people and it keeps them from taking their identity out of their place that's been assigned to them.
That's a Joe Biden slip where he says white people and poor people rather than
What do you mean by that?
Right, yeah. He's doing so well and then he racializes it. And I'm not saying race doesn't play a factor into these things, but it's beside the point. And yeah.
Mm-hmm.
morally.
Well, like
It's
I don't
beside
know
the
of any Christian, that believes like race is a factor in terms of justification, right? I don't actually know any Christian that believes that.
Well, in terms
Even
of
like the all
sanctification, there was that.
well, correct. But his argument I actually agree with, where it might be more difficult for certain races due to their culture to accept Christ. Right? And I believe that might actually be the case. That for some people it is harder, right?
He went a lot farther than that in his debate.
Well, his
saying?
argument goes all the way back to Genesis, which I have no idea about any of that.
Yeah.
So I don't have his argument for that, but I think the nicest way of putting it is that some people might have a harder time due to their race, due to geographic factors or whatnot. Like there actually might be a
Corey
legitimate-
Mahler's we're talking about.
Yeah, Corey Mahler, right. And he goes all the way back to Genesis. I don't know about any of that stuff. So I don't know if I buy any of that stuff where, that they're cursed and they've been cursed for 6,000 years and it's just gotten worse and worse and worse and that sort of thing.
He didn't
Yeah.
say they can't be saved.
No.
He just said it's impossible for God to sanctify them as much as white people or something like that. And he spends
Or it's more
half of an
difficult
argument with James
right?
White's. No, he says impossible, I think. Yeah, because
Well,
they spend half of the debate.
Does he say impossible to do it in the same way?
Yes,
he's,
exactly
he's,
right. He's saying impossible to get it as to sanctify as much or something like that, and then he spends half the debate arguing with James White that God, can't do certain things, right? That the statement that it's impossible for God to do something is not inherently false because God can't tell a lie. God can't swear by anything higher than himself, right? Those are two quotes from Scripture. But that doesn't prove his point at all that God can't sanctify a black person as much or more than a white person.
But I think he is drawing hard generalizations, right? So he's taking like the average black person and the average white, and he is saying it is easier for the average white than it is for the average black, right? So not in specifics, because you could always go to a specific, this white guy is way harder to sanctify because of his nature, his upbringing, whatever it is, than this black guy was raised in like a great Christian
that
family,
would have been
right?
a fine point, but to put it in terms of can God do something is so wacky. Like, yes, that might be the case in terms of generalities in this present situation. God could make it different with a snap of his finger. God has that power, absolutely, right? And Corey Mahler.
Well, I think Corey might even agree
explicitly-
with you. I think he might agree with you because I think he would say that he has done that for blacks over a period of time. And so he could, right, do the opposite, right, in reverse over a long period of time. Like he would say that he could do that, right? But the method of action that he chooses to use is, this slow over time like thing that has happened, right, in his worldview. And I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
Yeah, see, I don't know. I've only seen Corey Mahler in that debate, and it was an embarrassing debate for Corey Mahler. I don't know. If
I think I've seen it twice.
More tame in actuality, but
Almost Tyler.
Well, so I think he is like the definition of the autistic racist. Like just he has thought out his positions like autistically, and he will not like differ whatsoever.
yeah, it is a problem when you try to pose your positions in purely racial terms, and then just double down because just out of pride. I think that I think we were kind of on to something with the whole early 2000s colorblind movement of moving, away from seeing things in purely racial terms. And, then the CRT folks wanted to bring it all back.
But then you ignore that race is a real thing, though, which is kind of my position, is that race is a real thing. It does exist.
It's better to not think about it. It is better to think less about it than more about it in your personal life. That's what I've experienced. And I'm not.
Well, because I can. Okay. Well, so you say that. All right. So would you like to live around 1 million Somalians or 1 million Irish people?
Irish people.
Right. So I mean, it's like, well, I want to be blind. It's like, well, actually, I don't want to be blind. Right.
No.
Because
Yeah.
I prefer to live around. I'm not even Irish. But
And
I would
even in my own
prefer-
personal life, I talk about race all the time. Like with, I
Sure.
recently started some part-time evening work with a number of people of different race than I am. And, I will talk about race openly. So it's not like I won't talk about it. And if that's what someone means by colorblind, then I don't agree with that. But there is a point at which connecting race and morality is where the danger lies. Like in terms of just seeing the beauty in different racial characteristics, as well as the downside of certain racial characteristics, right? Certain races, because of their cultures, are prone to certain bad characteristics as well. That's not a problem, so that's not what I'm talking. When I talk about colorblindness, I guess I'm talking about connecting morality with race. In any capacity, I think really just weakens your argument, and it makes you look backwards, and it just isn't good for your soul. Thinking that way, I think it does. It causes you to start to see. It just increases the pride in your heart. It makes you think that you are better than other people because of some characteristics that you don't really get the credit for.
Right, and that pride is a sin.
And pride is a sin.
So
pride
I
is
totally
the ultimate sin. Yeah.
Right, I totally agree with that. But again, I think you're trying to, or at least you kind of see it on like the individual level, where I totally agree with you. I'm around people of different races like 24/7. Right. So I don't like hate people ontologically for their nature. Right. I just recognize that people are different. Right.
Right.
And different strengths and weaknesses, all that sort of fun stuff. So, I mean, I get like on the individual level, totally get, but like in the general, right? Because like when I see like 50 people running towards me with pitchforks, I don't like try to reason with them as individuals. Like they are a mob.
Yeah,
you can't do that. Yeah. Right.
So, yeah. And the other thing is, in terms of racial healing, racial humor is extremely important for racial healing, because once you know that you can joke around with someone, anyone, whether it's someone of the race or just in general, when you can kind of, at least for men, when you can dish it out and take it back, that's how you know that you've progressed to a level of trust. And so that's why racial humor is actually really important. So it needs to be socially acceptable to make racial jokes. That's not saying racist jokes. I mean, the jokes can be racist in their words, but it's the intent that makes a joke work or not, right? And so even if the words are racist, but the intent is for a punchline, then that's totally okay. Racial humor is extremely important in terms of bringing races together. And in Christ, there is neither Jew nor Greek, right? And that applies to that. We can generalize that to all races. And that should be the goal. And whatever, however you live that out in your personal life, assuming that is your goal, that's a good thing. That is a good goal to have. And you should be moving yourself personally towards that. And so, yes, it's not colorblindness and like not seeing the differences between races. I think that it's fun to notice the differences in races and point them out when acceptable, and sometimes for the sake of humor and jokes. But connecting any amount of morality to someone's race will get you in trouble and isn't good for your soul.
Well, and I think I want 2 points on there that I want to talk about. So jokes, humor, usually have some level of truth in them, right? So it exposes some level of underlying truth, which is why it's funny, right? Or why it hits, why it's relatable, right? Like that's what a meme is essentially, right? There's something that relates to you or some underlying truth that is there, which is why like a lot of like leftist humor or like really progressive where it's like, haha, evil, abortion, la, la, la. And it's like, that's just gross and evil. Like that, I don't find that like funny or anything else like that. But I do agree. It's like a pressure valve. If you can laugh about like stereotypes or like certain group tendencies or whatever it might be, it exposes that underlying truth and allows people to actually converse and engage with that in a light-mannered way, right? Rather than saying...
Assuming no contempt. Because there's a way to laugh with contempt, which will totally mess everything out, right? And that's
well, yeah, but let's say that like you can make a joke about like Karens clutching their pearls because your grass is 2 inches too long for your HOA, right?
Which is a racial joke. Yeah,
it is a racial joke,
stereotype.
right? Yeah. It is, yes, 100%. But there is a underlying truth that happens, and that maybe even you might know something about, James. You know where you live, all right? So there, it's exposing something that's underneath. The second part that I want to talk about, where it says neither Jew nor Greek, neither man nor woman, is usually referencing like a eschatological like end state, not like here in our own like flesh and blood right now, because I see progressives use that and say, see, There's neither male nor female. We're all just on a big old spectrum, right? There's no gender is just like a Western construct, right? This type of guy the next step after Tim Keller is the gender spectrum type guys, right? Where we need gender equity and, whether, however many genders there might be, right? So those are the 2 points I want to talk about.
Yep, fair enough.
All right, back to gangster rap culture.
Destroy the power of the system. Lastly, an awful lot of people that talk about systemic racism and evil and talk about systemic injustice are incredibly self-righteous as they do it. Christians ought to get alongside of people who say the criminal justice system, there's systemic evil that are keeping people of color and non-white people down, that the school system.
See, again, but we just disagree with him, like full stop. Like they're actually under incarcerated, right? It's like almost the exact opposite of what he believes. Like we as Christians need to come together to get them off of more crimes,
to get more black people in prison.
Well, like that's what we would say, right?
Yeah,
we want actual justice, but that's they don't have the power, right? They must be allowed to be out and stab white girls on trains. Okay, they must be allowed to do that. And yeah, it is when he talks about other people being self-righteous, it does seem a little projection-y.
No, I think he's talking about black people here. I think, I don't know, I think he's criticizing the left in that statement. It's hard when we chop up the video so many times, but I think at this point
let me go back to 15
left
seconds.
Is too self-righteous on this topic. I think.
Maybe I misunderstood him there.
Self-righteous as they do it.
15 seconds.
Destroy the power of the system. Lastly, an awful lot of people that talk about systemic racism and evil and talk about systemic injustice are incredibly self-righteous as they do it.
Okay, you're right.
Christians
like
ought
the
to get
Robin
alongside of
DiAngelos.
people who say the criminal justice system, there's systemic evil that are keeping people of color and non-white people down, that the school system, there's a whole lot of systems out there that are a huge problem, even when you have individual rights and that kind of thing. But the fact is that so many of the crusaders against systemic racism and injustice have an enormous amount of self-righteousness and anger that makes people write them off. If we're Christians, we know that we're sinners saved by grace. The gospel should humble us so that when we talk about injustice, we don't look at everybody else as the problem, and we're the ones who understand these things. All you idiots that don't believe in systemic evil. I heard Tim Keller preach on it. I know. And you're just a stupid, individualistic white person that doesn't understand these things. You just don't understand. But I do. See, the gospel takes that out of you forever and makes you a person who will probably be more likely to persuade people. So in all those ways, the gospel, I think, takes a look at corporate evil, helps us understand it, and changes our hearts and changes our ways of thinking so that we can do something about it. Thanks.
Yeah, he's saying you got to be more subversive about it. Don't be angry.
So yeah, this video was a litmus test for me back in the day. I would send this around, but after 2020, I sent this around to people just to get their perspectives, and I was surprised at how many people that I trusted and respected were like, "Yeah, I don't really see any issues with this," and even people in my own family who, I mean, eventually, who felt uncomfortable with it. They weren't sure exactly how to address it, and so it was it was a challenge for a lot of people. Certainly this way of thinking, whether they bought into this particular video or not. But at the time, people were challenged a lot in terms of their just racial thinking, and they thought, well, I guess this makes sense. I guess maybe there is sort of a corporate evil. Maybe I do bear some of the personal or the corporate responsibility for, meaning the personal responsibility for the sins of my nation in terms of slavery, and so maybe I should be involved in some of these corporate acts of and even personal acts of forgiveness seeking on racial grounds. It's a little passé. This issue is kind of past. People of the right, generally speaking, has moved beyond, especially the religious right, has moved beyond this way of thinking, and now we're thinking a lot more overtly racially in another way, which I think also should be warned against. But so I think in that respect, I think this actually does bear some modern relevance. And just to go back to my point, if I can see if I can share my screen for a second here.
While you're pulling that up, apparently Reformed Renegade thinks that Tim Keller is in Chris's basement.
Ooh, it's quite possible.
He says he's definitely with Chris right now. I think he means Christ, but he's spelled Chris, so that's quite funny.
How does he know I have a basement? That's concerning.
Yeah. This, can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, got it right here.
Yeah. Yeah, this, again, is the image that I just want to leave you with. This is my theory. And I've never found a passage in Scripture that goes against this. If this is how you think about corporate guilt, which, from what I can tell, does not exist, except for perhaps in the case of Adam, and corporate forgiveness, which does not exist except perhaps in the case of Christ. Otherwise, it's all the biblical examples you can point to that seem to be corporate guilt or corporate forgiveness are actually just mercy or punishment. And this is a real thing. This is an important thing to take into account when it comes to just war theory and all kinds of corporate conversations that we're having, or political conversations that we're having. This is individual, as far as I can tell, and I've never found an example in Scripture that contradicts this. So I'll just leave you with that.
And yeah, punishment and consequence. I think that very nicely kind of ties that off, right? Because we corporately do suffer the consequences of sin. Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Whatever, Israel during many of their walking away from Christ, right? They suffered the consequences, the temporal punishments from those things. Absolutely. But it's like we're all those individuals individualistically permanently guilty of those sins of like one person or many people, right? Well, would you like to end on a lighter note of Key and Peele on the auction block?
Pull it out.
All right, well, here we get copyright struck, but it won't matter. I love the concept of them getting jealous of the other slaves. Like, wait, aren't I worth $2?
Trying to sell themselves, yeah.
and then they get called out for being bigoted for making fun of the short guy.
Yeah, I love that bit. It's a perfect concept and just flawless execution. It's so good.
Now, some of their later work not as good. Not as good.
Oh yeah, it doesn't all. I mean, some of it, yeah. Some of it's funny concepts, but just drawn out too long, and yeah. But they've got some bangers.
Heck yeah. The one thing that we didn't talk about, maybe we'll talk about it next week when more comes out, but there was the shooting, well, the ramming, shooting, and arson of a LDS church this morning.
Yeah.
In,
Michigan, somewhere in Michigan.
Michigan, yeah, just outside of Detroit, like 20 miles north of Detroit. Where what I've heard so far, this is not confirmed, is that a Iraq War veteran, his wife and kids, the LDS church there, the Mormon church there, intervened between him abusing his wife and children and took them, kind of helped facilitate getting them away from him, like gave the wife and kids like a place to stay. And then he took revenge on them is kind of the story that's going around right now. Wow. Is that the husband and wife were going apart. The church body was helping the wife and kids get away from the man who was abusing them. Again, all allegedly at this point, but that's kind of the story. And then he went crazy, murdered 2 people with firearms. One's in critical condition, but many people are still missing, and the building burned to the ground. So I was getting messages from a gentleman who has family that attends that church, and he's saying it's actually much worse than what they're reporting, because there are people, like up to a dozen people missing in the building, and the building is gone. So because he rammed into the church. I don't know if you want to get into it now, or we can talk about it next week, because we're already 2 hours in the show. But very tragic thing, and you should pray for the families involved in that.
Just the LDS community in general, pray for them, because their president died too. He was 101.
Yeah, their prophet died. He just died. Yeah.
101 years old. That's insane.
Yeah. And it also reinforces. We've seen a lot of church shootings, a lot of people that are like, I know like I don't consider Mormons Christians, but they are like to the normie. They like the normie is not going to differentiate between like Mormons and Christians and you know, Catholics or Protestants or whatnot. They're just going to say, oh, it's a church, right? That sort of thing. But all I'm saying is that like this is you guys are a target now, unfortunately, if you attend a church. Churches are targets, and they're viewed as soft targets. It's your job, your responsibility as a man to make it not that way.
And open carry if you need to. I have. It can be. It can
Well,
feel weird,
I mean,
but-
I mean, it's something I need to do, but I need to talk to my pastor and leadership about having like an actual security team plan in
actual
place.
security teams
So,
are good.
Yeah.
The only thing about open carry is some states don't allow conceal carry without a permit, but open carry.
well, South Dakota is constitutional carry, so
Right.
South
Where if you have
Dakota's, like,
constitutional carry,
crazy,
great.
yeah.
North Carolina
Do you
is
think?
now. I don't know if they're quite constitutional carry, but they're a lot closer. But I don't know what the current law is right now. I have to look it up. I mean, I've had a permit for so long, I don't have to know. But there was a time when NC was open carry allowed, but not.
Sorry, no, he said Mormons and Orthodox are equal, and I was like, "What? That's wacky." All right.
that is
That's the
rage
rage bait. That's rage bait.
Gotcha.
I was about to bring up that comment, like, "What are you talking
What?
about?" No, that is pure rage bait.
But North Carolina was open carry without a permit, but you had to have a permit to conceal carry. And I lost my wallet for a period of time, so it would have been illegal for me to conceal carry without my permit on my person. And I was waiting like the 2-week period for the replacement to come in. And so I was like, well, you know what? I believe it's important to carry. These are dangerous times. This is back in 2020, I believe. And so I started open carrying just out of principle, where I was like, I feel like it's important enough to carry that even if the only option allowed is to open carry, if the only downside is a little bit of personal discomfort, I'm going to do it anyway. And I would recommend everyone do that at some point. Just open carry for a couple weeks just to feel what it's like, because it is different, but you will get into some very interesting and good conversations with people in your community. You'll find out a lot of people are pro-gun that you didn't necessarily know about. Like I met the guy at the UPS store that I go to pretty frequently, and yeah, he's a big gun guy. It's like you'll find things out. I'm sure you'll get some bad looks, mostly behind your back. You won't even notice those. I did get into one negative conversation, like at my church. Someone approached me and was like, "Hey, like, why'd you bring a gun to church?" And I was like, "I bring a gun to church every single week.
Okay, you
This
just
is
don't
not-
know it."
I just happened to take my jacket off today, and it was technically a concealed carry. I just took my jacket off, and I had a shoulder carry. But
Bro,
even
that's hipster Reddit to you right there. Kind of Kino. Okay, I actually also want a leather shoulder holster
totally
for
different
carrying in a
style, yeah.
suit. For carrying in a suit, I think that's kind of cool.
good look. It was a PPK too.
Some diehard vibes right there.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
But that conversation turned into a really good conversation, and actually a deeper relationship with that particular person who was an elder in the church. And you might bristle some, like some people might bristle at it, but it actually can be really good. And I think that it's sort of, if you do it in a non showy way, people will presume that it's showy no matter what. But if you can just show them through your actions and through your personality and through your attitude, and actually engage with people on a personal level, and show them that you're not doing this just because you're a ham. You're doing this because it's an important principle that you live by, and you're doing it for people's good and protection. It actually can lead to a lot of good conversations. So I would encourage it. It's one of those things that really, it was a step outside of my comfort zone, but was, I think, a growing experience for me. So just throwing that out for anyone who lives in in one of those states where open carry is allowed but conceal isn't for some reason without extra permits. I think it's still worth carrying. And from an everyday perspective, there is an argument against open carry on a tactical basis. People
Correct.
say,
Yeah.
like, oh, you don't get
I've seen the disarmament videos are not fun. Like if you ever watch somebody get his gun taken from him because he's not paying attention for a second, that is like.
And there's a concern there. Make sure you should have some levels of retention. But generally speaking, I think it's at worst a wash tactically. I mean, I'm not a tactical guy, so you don't have to take my advice.
Well,
but,
it's if the option is no gun or open carry, it's open carry.
definitely
right?
open carry. But even in terms of open carry versus concealed carry, I don't think you make yourself a target. Maybe for theft, but again, just be careful in terms of where you open carry. Don't open carry. Don't open carry. In
4 o'clock.
in a 4 o'clock position.
That's where I see it. Somebody bends over to pick something up. They're looking in the grocery
No
store
retention.
like, which carton of milk do I buy? And then somebody comes by and just grabs it right out because it's sitting in a leather holster. Yeah.
Right, but generally speaking, if you're open carrying in an overt way, someone comes in meaning to do bad, they're gonna pick an easier target than the target with the gun. They're gonna go somewhere else. I think it'll more often than not be a deterrent than an attraction. And I think at the worst it ends up being a wash. But I'm pretty pro open carry. I think that it's a cool thing, and I don't know about you guys, but when I see someone else open carrying, I'm like, cool, dude. I don't judge them for it. I mean, it depends on the person. It depends on their way of carrying themselves.
Most people that I see open carry are like 60, 65 plus.
That's
right.
normally
That's the kind of open carry that I see. And it's like, that's fine. Now again, where I live here, like it's guns and hunting season, right? So we went to a steakhouse the other night with everybody, and the waitress was like, "Oh, what are you guys here for?" She's like, "Shooting competition," because she saw we're all wearing our shooting shirts and whatnot. We're like, yeah. But it's just very, very normal. Like South Dakota is guns and hunting is half the year basically, right? So it's very normal. But if you're in like, I don't know, Utah or Florida or near a college town or something like that, the vibe is probably going to be a little bit different.
That's actually funny. I have a story. I was coming off of the mountains camping with some of the boys, and I was open carrying my Glock 17 in a Safariland 6000 series, whatever. We go to like Chick-fil-A or something. I was like, you know what? It's legal here. I'll just leave it on. We get a bunch of, in Salt Lake City's relatively liberal, whatnot. Mm-hmm. And we're getting some dirty looks from some older women. And we see a police car pull up into the parking lot, and he's just sitting there hanging out. And he proceeds to follow us out of town as well. Yeah. It was just kind of,
somebody probably said, "Hey, this guy has a gun in his holster." It's like,
yeah. It was just a very strange interaction. But but in my small little town, I've done it numerous times and nobody even bats an eye. So yeah. But to that point as well, us being proficient shooters, it's also our duty to find out who does own guns in your church and take them out to the range, go shooting with them, help them get better. It's 100% our responsibility.
And plus, it's a cool way to actually interact with people, right? Because I'm autistic, so I can't talk about other things other than guns.
Yeah.
Great icebreaker.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Well, on that note, I think we're about 2.5 hours in. So thank you all for being with us tonight. And we will see you next Sunday, if not before. John's got plenty of streams throughout the week at Focus Trip, so check him out. Thank you all. God bless.
All right. Have a good night, gents. God bless.